Everyone laughed when a wheelchair-bound billionaire adopted twin girls who lived on the streets. But when one of them said, "I know how to make you walk again," he was stunned. And what happened after that is unbelievable. Sawyer Hale's mansion was far too large for one man. On clear days, sunlight poured in through the tall windows, forming golden rectangles on the hardwood floors. On cloudy days, the house felt even emptier. In any weather, silence reigned. At 42 years old, Sawyer lived like a ghost in his own home. Since Caroline had died in the accident a year ago, he had chosen a solitary, silent existence. His routine was simple: wake up, work in his home office, eat meals alone, sleep. He avoided anything that might remind him of the life they had built together. The house sat atop a hill, overlooking the city. The garden remained well-maintained thanks to the gardeners who came twice a week. The white roses Caroline had planted still bloomed near the entrance, but Sawyer avoided looking at them whenever he passed by. His tech company, founded 15 years earlier, continued to thrive even with his increasingly distant presence. Daniel, his longtime friend and Vice President C, had taken on many of the responsibilities over the past year. Sawyer's only connection to the outside world was through emails, video conferences, and spreadsheets. In the beginning, after the funeral, his friends tried to help. Daily phone calls, surprise visits, invitations to dinners or trips. Sawyer refused all of it, first with polite excuses, then with a coldness that left no room for insistence. Now he only spoke with those absolutely necessary: Robert, his driver, Martha, the housekeeper, and his personal assistant at the company. The photographs of Caroline were removed from the walls and stored in boxes in the basement. Her books, however, remained on the living room shelf. Caroline had loved reading. Sometimes Sawyer would pick up a book and look for the notes she had scribbled in the margins, as if through those words he could keep some connection with her. The bedroom they had shared remained untouched. Sawyer moved into one of the guest rooms. He couldn't sleep in the bed they had shared for so long. On that Wednesday, Sawyer had to leave the house. An important meeting with investors, one that couldn't be done by video call. He put on a dark suit, straightened his tie without enthusiasm, and slowly made his way downstairs, gripping the handrail. Since the accident, Sawyer had used a wheelchair, not out of absolute necessity, but by choice. The doctors assured him that with intensive physical therapy, he would walk normally again. His spinal injury was serious, but not irreversible. However, Sawyer had quit the treatment a few weeks in. It was as though the wheelchair was his penance. Caroline died. He survived. It didn't seem fair. "Good morning, sir," Robert greeted as he opened the door of the adapted car. "Good morning," Sawyer replied, without lifting his eyes. Robert was a discreet man, a quality Sawyer appreciated. He had worked for him for 8 years, and over the last year he'd learned to respect his employer's silence. He secured the wheelchair in the vehicle's compartment and started the drive into the city. The sky was heavy, promising rain later on. Sawyer watched the scenery through the window without really seeing it. People walking, kids running, cars honking. Life went on for everyone but him, stuck in a moment, frozen in the past. The meeting took place at the top of a modern building. In a room overlooking the city, 6 investors awaited him. For 2 hours, Sawyer presented projections, answered questions, and negotiated terms. His voice was firm, his arguments solid. Professionally, he was still the same shrewd man as ever, even if he operated on autopilot. He secured the investment he was looking for. A professional victory that brought him no satisfaction. It was just another day, another task completed. By the time the meeting ended, night had fallen. A light rain fell over the city. "Home, sir?" Robert asked, opening the umbrella to protect Sawyer on the way to the car. "Yes," he answered, settling himself in the seat. Downtown traffic was gridlocked. To avoid the worst of it, Robert chose an alternate route, taking a less crowded avenue that skirted a simpler part of the city. The streetlights were sparse there, and the sidewalks were almost empty due to the rain, which was now coming down harder. It was along that stretch, when they stopped at a red light, that Sawyer saw them. 2 small girls were asleep, curled up in an alcove between a closed drugstore and a convenience store that was still open. A small overhang shielded them somewhat from the rain, but not from the cold night. They covered themselves with pieces of cardboard, damp at the edges. One clung to the other in an instinctive, protective gesture. The light turned green, and the car moved a few yards forward. Sawyer, however, couldn't look away. Something about that scene held him in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just pity. He often saw people living on the streets, and he donated generously to charities, but he rarely got involved personally. "Robert," he called out, his voice louder than usual. "Pull over." The driver, surprised by the unexpected request, parked just ahead. "Is something wrong, sir?" "Go back to that drugstore. The kids—" Robert maneuvered around and drove back. Sawyer rolled down the window to get a better look. The girls had woken up, probably due to the noise of the car stopping so close. They watched with apprehension, hugging each other. They were identical, twins. They had dark, disheveled hair, dirty, thin faces, and clothes far too big for their frail bodies. But it was their eyes that captured Sawyer's attention. Dark, deep eyes, carrying a wisdom far beyond their years, a mix of fear and courage, vulnerability and resilience. "Are you two alone?" Sawyer asked, trying to soften his voice. The girls didn't answer. They just huddled closer, clinging to each other as if they were one. "Are you hungry?" The smaller one nodded almost imperceptibly. The other remained still, protective. Sawyer wasn't sure what he was doing. He'd never been good with children. He and Caroline had talked about having kids, but he always put it off, saying they needed the perfect timing, financial stability, the company's expansion, and then time ran out, along with all the possibilities. "Robert," Sawyer said, still looking at the girls, "you have kids, right?" "Yes, sir." "Two girls. What would you do if you found children like this in the rain?" Robert looked at the girls and then at Sawyer, thoughtful. "Well, sir, I'd try to help. Maybe call social services." Sawyer shook his head. The idea of involving the authorities and subjecting the girls to the system didn't sit well with him. "I'm taking them home," he decided, "just for tonight. We'll figure out what to do in the morning." Sawyer opened the car door. "Would you like to come with me?" he asked the girls. "I have hot food and a dry place to sleep." The girls exchanged glances, as if speaking without words. The bigger one whispered something in the other's ear. After a long moment of hesitation, both stood up slowly. "What's your name?" Sawyer asked the one who seemed older. "Lila," she whispered. Pointing to her sister, she added, "She's June. Nice to meet you. I'm Sawyer." When the girls got in the car, Sawyer noted how small and fragile they were. Their thin arms, their bones visible beneath pale skin. Their knees and elbows were marked by scars, evidence of life on the streets. On the way up to the mansion, they stayed silent, pressed together in the back seat. They stared out the window with a mix of fear and fascination as the car climbed the hill, leaving the city lights behind. Sawyer tried to make conversation a few times, asking if they had family or how long they'd been on the streets. All he got was silence and cautious looks. When they arrived, the rain had let up, but the sky was still heavy. The mansion loomed against the dark horizon, its windows lit in stark contrast to the surrounding darkness. Robert helped Sawyer with his wheelchair, then opened the door for the girls. "Wow," exclaimed June, her first spoken word. "Is this a castle?" The innocence in her question took Sawyer by surprise, almost making him smile. Almost. "No, it's just a big house." The house that had once felt empty now seemed even larger with the two children inside. They looked tiny in the entrance hall, gazing around with a blend of caution and wonder. June pointed at the chandelier and the paintings on the walls. Lila remained serious, watching Sawyer's every move. The first thing Sawyer did was ask Robert to fix something for them to eat while he phoned Martha, the housekeeper who lived in a small house behind the main property. "Martha, I need you in the main house right now. It's an emergency." Martha arrived within minutes, still in a robe over her pajamas, her grey hair twisted into a hurried bun. Upon seeing the girls at the huge kitchen table, eating sandwiches Robert had prepared, her eyes widened. "Mr. Hale, what's going on?" "I found them on the street. They couldn't spend the night out in the rain." Martha was practical and in her 50s, having worked for Sawyer for over a decade. She never asked too many questions, a quality he especially appreciated in the past year. "They need a bath," was all she said, noticing the girls' damp, dirty clothes. "And clean clothes. Can you take care of that?" Martha nodded, approaching the girls with a gentle smile. "Hello, I'm Martha. Let's get you a hot bath, okay?" June returned a shy smile. Lila merely observed, as vigilant as ever. "Is there dessert?" June asked, eyeing the sandwich she was about to finish. Martha looked at Sawyer, who nodded. "We have ice cream," Martha replied. "After your bath, all right." June lit up. Even Lila relaxed slightly at the prospect of ice cream. As Martha took the girls upstairs, Sawyer stayed in the kitchen, pondering what he had just done. It was not like him to act on impulse. He was a methodical man who weighed his options, planning every step carefully. But something in those children's eyes had touched a part of him that he thought had died with Caroline. "You're really going to let them stay the night?" Robert asked, interrupting Sawyer's thoughts. "Yes. I'll decide what to do in the morning." "If I may, sir, you should notify the authorities. Someone might be looking for them." Sawyer nodded without much conviction. "We'll check on that tomorrow. You can go home now, Robert, thank you." After the driver left, Sawyer went to the library. He sat in his favorite chair, facing the unlit fireplace, and poured himself a whiskey. He sat there, sipping slowly, listening to muffled sounds from upstairs. Footsteps, running water, female voices, noises the house hadn't heard in a long time. An hour later, Martha returned to the library. "They're clean and dressed. I used some of your old t-shirts as nightgowns. They're huge on them, but they'll do for today." "Where are they now?" "In the guest room on the second floor, the blue one. They ate ice cream and are almost asleep." Sawyer nodded. "Thank you, Martha. You can go rest. We'll figure out what to do tomorrow." After the housekeeper left, Sawyer made his way to the second floor. He stopped outside the door to the blue room, listening. The girls spoke in soft voices, almost a whisper. He knocked gently before entering. They were in bed together, curled up under the blanket. They stopped talking the moment they saw him. "Everything okay?" he asked. June nodded. Lila stayed serious, just watching. "If you need anything during the night, my room is at the end of the hall." "Why do you have a wheelchair?" June asked, curious. The question was so direct, it caught Sawyer off guard. People usually looked at his wheelchair but pretended not to notice, or offered silent pity he despised. "I had an accident," he answered, providing no detail. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Sometimes." "We hurt sometimes too," Lila said, finally speaking, "on the inside." The simplicity and depth of that statement struck Sawyer like a physical blow. He studied their faces, trying to imagine what they'd been through to understand pain so well. "Get some sleep," was all he could manage, his voice lower than normal. "We'll talk more tomorrow." As he was leaving, he heard June ask, "Are we going to stay here?" Sawyer paused in the doorway, unsure how to answer. "For now," he said, and closed the door. In the quiet corridor, he stood for several minutes. The mansion, once a mausoleum of memories, now had a room occupied by 2 children. It had been a long time since he'd heard other sounds besides his own and the occasional steps of Martha or Robert. Now there were whispers, light footsteps, the sound of running water in a bathroom. Small sounds of life breaking the house's silence. Sawyer returned to his room and sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at the photograph of Caroline on his nightstand, the only one he hadn't put away in the basement. In it, Caroline was smiling, her blonde hair blown by the wind, her bright blue eyes full of life. It had been taken during a trip to the coast 2 years before the accident. "What am I doing, Caroline?" he murmured to the picture. "What am I supposed to do with them?" Of course, there was no answer, only the silence he'd come to know so well, the silence that had been his only companion for the past year. But something had changed. The mansion was still cold, still carried Caroline's absence in every corner. Yet now, for the first time in a year, it also held small signs of life. 3 days had passed since Sawyer had brought the girls home. On the morning after he found them, he had called his lawyer, giving him a vague explanation of the situation. Morgan, a meticulous man who had handled Sawyer's legal affairs for over a decade, promised to check if there were any reports of missing children. He also suggested contacting social services, but not urgently. "Let them stay a few days," Morgan said over the phone. "If someone's looking for them, we'll find out soon enough. Otherwise, we'll have time to think about the best options." Sawyer agreed, though he couldn't explain why he wanted them to stay. Maybe it was just the interruption of his empty routine, maybe a distraction from his own thoughts, or perhaps something in those children's eyes that touched a place he thought was dead. Martha, the housekeeper, proved surprisingly adept with the girls. On the second day, she took them shopping for clothes and shoes, returning with colorful bags and a sparkle in her eye Sawyer hadn't seen in a long time. She also bought children's books, drawing supplies, and a few toys, one doll for each of them, building blocks, and simple games. But the toys remained mostly untouched, neatly arranged in the corner of the room they now occupied. The girls didn't play like typical kids. They didn't run or make noise or scatter things around. They moved cautiously, as though afraid of breaking something or being a nuisance. On the first night, they hesitated upon entering the bedroom Martha had prepared. "Can we sleep together?" Lila asked, eyeing the two separate beds. "Of course," Martha replied, pushing the beds together with Robert's help. Even then, they slept clinging to one another, as if afraid to be separated in their sleep. On the third day, Sawyer watched them from the living room doorway. June sat on the rug, drawing with the colored pencils Martha had bought. Lila, beside her, flipped through a picture book without really reading. They hadn't asked if they could stay permanently, a detail Sawyer found curious. Most children would bombard him with questions, seeking reassurance, showing either anxiety or hope. These two did not. They simply existed in the present, without apparent expectations. "Do you want to see my drawing?" June asked, noticing Sawyer was watching. He approached, rolling his wheelchair until he was beside them. The drawing showed 3 stick figures, 2 small ones and a larger one in a wheelchair, in front of a big house with many windows. "That's us," June explained, pointing to the figures. Sawyer felt something twist in his chest as he looked at the simple picture. The 3 figures were connected by lines that seemed to be holding hands. "It's very nice," he said, his voice rougher than usual. June smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her small face. Then she returned to her drawing, adding a sun in the corner of the paper. During lunch, Sawyer noticed how slowly the girls ate, savoring each bite as if it was something precious. Martha had made spaghetti with tomato sauce and meatballs, a simple dish she thought any child would like. They finished everything, but with an uncommon restraint for their ages. "You don't have to store food in your cheek, June," Martha gently reminded her, noticing the girl's tendency to tuck some away. "There's plenty more in the pot if you want seconds." June looked embarrassed, then swallowed what she had saved. "We never know when we'll get food again," Lila explained, always the protector, always the one who spoke up. Martha and Sawyer exchanged glances. What must these kids have experienced to develop such habits? "You'll always have food here," Sawyer said. 3 meals a day, plus snacks if you want." Lila studied his face, searching for signs of deceit. Then she nodded slightly. That afternoon, after lunch, Sawyer went to his office to work. He had video conferences scheduled and emails to answer, but he found it hard to concentrate. His thoughts kept drifting to the 2 children now occupying a room in his home. Children who asked no questions, made no demands, and ate each meal as though it might be their last. 2 hours later, he was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. "Come in," he said, expecting Martha. To his surprise, it was Lila. She entered hesitantly, as if testing whether the invitation was genuine. "Do you need something?" Sawyer asked. "Are you mad at us?" The question caught him off guard. "No. Why would I be?" "You stay away. Are we making too much noise?" Sawyer realized how she might have interpreted his distancing himself. "No, Lila. I have work to do. I'm not mad." She seemed to consider this, standing near the door. "What do you two like to do?" Sawyer asked, realizing he knew very little about them besides their names. Lila shrugged. "June likes to draw. I like stories. Can you read?" "A little." We learned at the shelter before. She trailed off, and Sawyer didn't press for details. Can I stay here? She asked after a pause. I promise I won't bother you. Sure. Lila chose a corner of the room, settling into a large armchair that dwarfed her. She took out one of the books she'd brought, a picture book about marine animals, and began flipping through it quietly. Sawyer tried to return to work, but his attention was divided between the computer screen and the silent girl in the corner. It felt strange to have someone else in his office, not unpleasant, just different. After a few minutes, Lila spoke again, her eyes still on the book. Do you have children? No, Sawyer replied. My wife died a year ago. We never had kids. He wasn't sure why he included that last part, maybe because it was the first time one of the girls had asked something personal. Maybe because, in some way, it felt important to be honest with them. Lila lifted her gaze from the book to meet his eyes. Now you have people at home, she said with disarming simplicity. Those simple words hit Sawyer in a way he hadn't expected. They weren't a trivial attempt at comfort like the ones he'd heard at Caroline's funeral. They weren't pitying. They were just a matter-of-fact observation, direct, honest, without pretense. Yes, now I do, he agreed. That night, after the girls went to bed, Sawyer stayed in the living room, looking at the drawing June had made. 3 figures in front of a big house, an improvised family. On the 4th day, something subtle began to change. The girls moved around the house with a bit more freedom. June found a spot by the living room window where the light was perfect for drawing. Lila discovered the library and spent hours there, browsing through the picture books Martha had bought. Sawyer decided to work in the living room instead of his office. He set up his laptop on a side table and discreetly watched as the girls explored their new environment. It was noisier, less efficient, but somehow more alive. Martha noticed the change. I never thought I'd see you working outside your office, she remarked while serving coffee. Sawyer said nothing but understood her meaning. Over the last 12 months, he'd lived a rigid routine, avoiding any changes. Now he was breaking his own rules. On the 5th day, heavy rain kept everyone indoors. Martha had to step out to take care of personal errands, leaving Sawyer alone with the girls for the first time. He found them in the living room, looking a bit lost. Would you like to hear a story? He asked, surprising even himself with the offer. Their faces lit up. They ran to pick out a book and returned quickly, sitting on the carpet near his wheelchair. Sawyer began to read. It was a simple story about a bear who lost his red hat. As he read, he changed his voice for the different characters, something he hadn't done in years, not since reading to his nieces and nephews on family visits. June laughed at the funny parts. Lila studied the illustrations attentively, soaking in every detail. By the end of the story, when the bear found his hat, both girls smiled, pleased with the outcome. Another one? June asked. Sawyer hesitated, then nodded. Another one. One story turned into 2, then 3. The rain continued outside, providing a soft, comforting soundtrack. Inside, for the first time in a long while, the house was filled with signs of life. The turning of pages, small bursts of laughter when something funny happened. The occasional question about the illustrations. When Martha returned, she found the 3 of them in the living room, Sawyer in his wheelchair, reading a book, and the girls sitting on the carpet, completely engrossed. She paused at the door, not wanting to interrupt the moment. And then the frog said, "But this isn't my pond, I'm in the wrong pond," Sawyer read, giving the frog a funny voice. June burst into laughter, a pure sound that echoed through the room. Even Lila, usually so serious, was smiling. Martha quietly stepped back, letting them enjoy the moment. Later, while she prepared dinner, she noticed Sawyer was more talkative, asking the girls what they'd like to eat, actually listening to their answers with genuine interest. "Can we have cake for dessert?" June asked timidly. "Sure," Sawyer replied, without the usual hesitation accompanying his decisions. Dinner was more animated than usual. The girls spoke more, describing the books they'd read and the drawings June had done. Sawyer listened, asked questions, and responded without his usual defensiveness, an armor he'd worn since Caroline's death. It was Lila who brought up the lingering question during dessert. "How long are we going to stay?" she asked, looking directly at Sawyer. The question held no anxiety or fear, just curiosity, as if she were preparing herself mentally for any possible answer. Sawyer set his fork down. He'd spoken to Morgan that morning. There was no report of missing children matching the twins' description. The next step would be contacting social services, starting a formal process. But something within him resisted that idea. "Would you like to stay?" he asked instead of answering directly. June nodded enthusiastically. Lila was more reserved, studying Sawyer's face. "Do you want us to stay?" she asked, revealing an understanding beyond her years about what really mattered in this scenario. Sawyer looked at the two girls, so small, so frail, yet with an inner strength he could only admire. He thought of the empty house, the empty days, the empty life he'd led for the past year. And then he thought of the last 5 days, the house slowly filling up with life again. "Yes," he said, surprising himself with the resolve in his voice. "I want you to stay." June smiled a broad, open smile. Lila allowed a small smile to appear, but her eyes shone. "For how long?" she pressed, needing clarity. "For as long as you want, for as long as it's good for all of us." It wasn't a promise of adoption. There were still many legal and bureaucratic hurdles ahead, but it was a commitment, and both the girls and Sawyer recognized that. That night, as he tucked them into bed, Sawyer noticed something different in the room. The toys that had been neatly arranged in a corner were now scattered around on the rug. There was an open book on a pillow and a new drawing taped to the wall, 3 figures under an umbrella. "Good night," he said, adjusting the blanket. "Good night," they replied in unison. As he left the room, Sawyer realized he was smiling. A small, almost imperceptible smile, but genuine. The first in a very long time. The house was still too big. There were still empty corridors and silence lurking in corners. But now there were also drawings on the fridge, children's books on the coffee table, the sound of small footsteps on the floors. After a year of living like a shadow, Sawyer was beginning to feel the first rays of light penetrating his darkness. It wasn't total healing, nor did it mean the pain was gone. But it was a start. The oversized house, once a mausoleum of memories, was slowly beginning to feel like a home again. Autumn arrived with persistent rains. It had been about a month since the girls had moved into Sawyer's home. A month of small changes, subtle adjustments, and silences that were gradually turning into conversations. Martha had transformed one of the empty rooms into a space just for the girls, with new beds, colorful curtains, and a small bookshelf for their books and toys. The once plain white walls now displayed June's drawings, smiling suns, houses with smoking chimneys, 3 figures holding hands. New routines took shape naturally. Breakfast together in the kitchen, Sawyer working from home most days, the girls drawing, reading, or quietly playing. Lunch, more work, more drawings. A walk in the garden if the weather allowed. Dinner. A bedtime story. Martha came daily but no longer slept in the house. "They need to feel this is their home, not some kind of institution with employees," she explained to Sawyer. That night, a violent storm raged outside. Strong winds made the mansion's windows rattle. Lightning lit up the sky at irregular intervals, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. Sawyer couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, listening to the rain against the glass, lost in thought. Lately, he'd been considering something he'd never imagined before, something he hadn't discussed with anyone, not even the girls. A particularly loud thunderclap exploded near the house, causing the lights to flicker and then go out completely. Sawyer sighed. Likely the storm had knocked out a power line. It wasn't uncommon in that region. He reached for his phone on the nightstand to use as a flashlight when he heard it. The soft sound of footsteps in the corridor. The door to his room opened slowly with a faint creak. Sawyer turned on the phone's flashlight, partially illuminating the room. 2 small silhouettes stood in the doorway. June and Lila, hand in hand, eyes wide with fear. "Can we come in?" Lila asked in a near whisper. Before Sawyer could answer, another thunderclap shook the house. The girls flinched, and June let out a small whimper. "Of course," he replied, placing the phone on the table so its light cast a soft glow around the room. Without another word, the twins approached the bed. For a moment, Sawyer thought they would ask to sleep beside him. Instead, They lay down at the foot of the bed, curled up like kittens, not even pulling up the covers. The action took him by surprise. It was such a strange gesture, asking for closeness yet maintaining distance, seeking security without demanding comfort. It was as if they knew exactly how much they could ask for without imposing. Sawyer remained still for a moment, observing the two small forms at the foot of his bed. Then, slowly, he took an extra blanket from a trunk nearby and spread it over them. "Are you scared of the thunder?" he asked in a low voice. "No," Lila answered after a pause. "We had a bad dream." "Both of you?" "We always have the same dream," June explained, her voice muffled by the blanket. "It's like we share one mind." Sawyer didn't question the childlike logic. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed the almost supernatural bond between the twins, finishing each other's sentences, seeming to communicate silently, reacting identically to the same situations. "Do you want to talk about the dream?" he asked. Silence followed, broken only by the sound of the rain against the windows and a distant rumble of thunder. "We dreamed you were going to leave," Lila finally said. "Like our mom." Those simple words hit Sawyer like a physical blow. It was the first time they had mentioned their mother or anything about their past. "I'm not going anywhere," he assured them, his voice more forceful than he intended. "Everybody leaves eventually," Lila replied, with a bitter wisdom that no child should have. Sawyer had no answer for that. It was true, after all. People leave. Caroline did. He almost did as well, vanishing into himself, becoming a shadow of the man he once was. "I'm here now," was all he could say. The girls gave no reply, but he felt them gradually relax, their small bodies releasing tension. Soon their breathing became steady and deep. They fell asleep. Sawyer stayed awake for a long time, thinking, staring at these two sleeping children, so vulnerable yet so resilient. He felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Clarity. Since the accident, he'd been living in a fog, no direction, no purpose, merely existing. Now, looking at June and Lila, he knew exactly what he needed to do. When morning came, the girls were still asleep. Sawyer moved carefully to avoid waking them. The storm had passed, and sunlight now streamed through the curtains. In the kitchen, he prepared coffee and picked up the phone. It was only 6 in the morning, but he knew Morgan, his lawyer, was an early riser. "Sawyer, is something wrong?" Morgan asked, his voice alert despite the hour. "No, nothing's wrong," Sawyer replied. "Actually, it's the opposite. I've made a decision. About the girls. I want to adopt both of them." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Morgan knew Sawyer well, knew how he'd withdrawn after Caroline's death, how he'd isolated himself, refusing anything that could bring meaning back into his life. "Are you sure?" Morgan finally asked. "It's a huge decision, changing your entire life like this." "My life has already changed," Sawyer replied. "I'm just accepting it now." The process would be long and complex, Morgan warned. There were no official records of the girls, and nobody had reported them missing. They would have to involve social services and possibly the police. There would be evaluations, interviews, and court hearings. "I don't care how long it takes," Sawyer insisted. "They'll stay with me during the process. They're not going to any shelter or foster care." "That might be hard to guarantee." "That's why I'm paying you, Morgan, to make the hard things possible." After hanging up, Sawyer noticed his hands were trembling slightly. It was excitement, he realized, not anxiety or fear. Excitement at the possibility of a new beginning, of a new direction. He heard soft footsteps behind him. June and Lila stood in the kitchen doorway, still in pajamas, hair tousled. "Good morning," he said, smiling at them. "Good morning," they answered in unison. "Did you sleep well?" "After the nightmare." They nodded, studying him curiously. Something was different about him that morning, and even children so young could sense it. "Come on, I'll make breakfast," he said, pointing to the chairs at the table. "Then how about we go to the park? It's a nice day after the rain." Their faces lit up at the prospect. It was the first time he'd suggested an outing that wasn't a doctor's appointment or for essential shopping. As he prepared pancakes, Sawyer realized he was humming quietly. a tune Caroline used to sing in the mornings. A year ago, that simple act would have plunged him into sorrow. Now it felt natural, almost comforting. A new life was taking shape. Not perfect, not without challenges, not without the pain he would always carry, but a life, nonetheless. A life with purpose. And that, Sawyer realized, was the first real step out of the place he'd been stuck for so long. His heart was beginning to move, to open, to regain its normal rhythm. Eventually, his legs would follow. The first few weeks after Sawyer decided to adopt the girls passed in a blur of activity. Morgan, the lawyer, visited frequently with papers for Sawyer to sign and updates on the process. A social worker, Mrs. Lambert, visited the house 3 times, observing how Sawyer and the twins interacted, asking questions, taking notes. She seemed skeptical at first, but her gaze softened with each visit. "It's unusual," she said during her last visit, "a single man wanting to adopt 2 children at once, especially in your situation." Sawyer knew she was referring to the wheelchair, though she was too polite to say it outright. "I have resources," he replied. "I can give them everything they need. Material resources aren't everything, Mr. Hale. I know." Mrs. Lambert watched June and Lila playing in the garden through the window. For the first time since they'd arrived, the girls truly looked like children, running, laughing, chasing butterflies. "They seem happy," she commented. "We're learning together," Sawyer said. During this period, Sawyer worked exclusively from home. He cancelled business trips, delegated meetings, and held video conferences from his home office. Daniel, his vice president, took on many of Sawyer's responsibilities without complaint, though Sawyer could sense Daniel's curiosity in the subtext of his emails and messages. Martha was the one who finally addressed the issue one afternoon while Sawyer was signing more documents. "You'll have to return to the office eventually," she said, placing a cup of coffee beside him. "People are talking." "Talking about what?" "About you. About the girls." Rumors spread quickly. Sawyer shrugged. Let them talk. But he knew Martha was right. Hale Technologies employed over 200 people. He was the founder, the face of the company. His prolonged absence, with no clear explanation, was fueling speculation. A week later, with the adoption process officially underway and the girls enrolled in a nearby school, Sawyer decided it was time to return. "I'll be home for dinner," he promised as he said goodbye to them one Monday morning. "Martha will stay with you after school." "Are you going to work in that big place with the glass windows?" June asked, referring to the company building they'd seen in photos. "Yes. Can we visit someday?" The question caught him off guard. The idea of his personal and professional lives overlapping felt strange. Before the accident, Caroline rarely visited his office. Afterwards, he had kept everyone at arm's length. "Sure," he answered, surprising himself. "One of these days." Robert waited by the entrance. On the drive downtown, Sawyer felt uncharacteristically nervous. It was absurd, he thought. This was his company, the one he'd built from scratch. Why did he feel like an intruder? When they arrived, Janet, his assistant of 7 years, greeted him with a cautious smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Hale. Everyone's waiting in the conference room." Sawyer had scheduled a meeting with the leadership team for his first morning back. Best to tackle everything head-on, he thought. The room fell silent when he entered. 8 faces observed him, some curious, some uneasy, all cautious. Daniel stood, extending a hand. "Good to have you back, Sawyer." Sawyer shook his hand, grateful for the normalcy of the gesture. "Thanks for covering for me." The meeting started with project updates and financial reports. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, even without his constant presence. That should have been reassuring, but somehow it made him feel even more out of place. When the formal part of the meeting ended, Daniel cleared his throat. "So, Sawyer, is there anything you'd like to share with the team, on a personal note?" The room grew tense. Clearly everyone suspected or had heard something. "I'm adopting 2 girls," Sawyer said bluntly. "That's why I've been working from home these past weeks." A brief silence followed. Then Eric, the CFO, let out a short laugh. "Seriously? You? With kids?" "Yes," Sawyer replied, keeping his voice neutral. "Me." "I heard you found them. On the street, asked Melissa, the marketing director, trying to sound casual. Is that true? Yes. A murmur spread through the room. Eric leaned over to Kevin, the development director, whispering something that made Kevin attempt to stifle a laugh. Something funny? Sawyer asked, his eyes fixed on the two. No, nothing, Kevin responded quickly. But Eric, more direct or reckless than the others, shrugged. It's just, well, it's unexpected. You never showed any interest in kids before, and now all of a sudden you're a dad to two girls you found on the street. The condescending tone in his voice was unmistakable. Sawyer caught a few smirks around the table. What Eric means, Daniel interjected, trying to smooth things over, is that we're surprised. Happy for you, of course, but surprised. He's become a dad to a couple of homeless kids, Sawyer heard Kevin mutter to Eric, not quietly enough. The room fell silent. Everyone realized a line had been crossed. Sawyer felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. Not the cold, distant anger he'd felt for so long, but something hot and protective. Before the accident, he might have responded with a harsh reprimand or even fired Kevin on the spot. But now he felt a different response emerging. Their names are June and Lila, he said, voice calm but firm. They have dark hair, brown eyes, and the same smile. June draws little suns everywhere. Lila can memorize entire pages of a book after reading them once. They sleep holding hands and finish each other's sentences. The room went completely quiet. Even Eric looked uncomfortable. When I found them, Sawyer continued, my house was an empty place. I was an empty man, spending my days working, my nights just existing with no purpose, no direction. He paused, looking around the table, meeting each person's gaze. They changed my life. I don't expect you to understand. His words hung in the air. The smirks had vanished. Kevin looked ready to sink into his chair. I'll continue working mostly from home over the next few months, Sawyer concluded. Daniel will keep overseeing daily operations. If anyone has a problem with that, my door is always open. No one said anything more. The meeting wrapped up soon after, and everyone hurried out. Only Daniel stayed behind, waiting until they were alone. I'm sorry about them, he said. Eric and Kevin can be idiots sometimes. Sawyer shrugged. Doesn't matter. It does matter. You're the boss. They should show more respect. I'm not worried about respect, Sawyer replied. I'm worried about June and Lila, about doing right by them. Daniel studied his friend for a moment. You're different. Am I? You're more present. Even when you used to be here physically, you seemed a million miles away. Sawyer considered that. It was true. Since the accident, he had disconnected from everything and everyone. The wheelchair wasn't just a physical aid. It was a boundary he'd erected between himself and the world, a visible line marking his self-imposed isolation. The girls need me, he said simply. Present, fully. Daniel smiled. I think you need them too. On the drive home, Sawyer felt surprisingly light. The remarks and look still bothered him, but not as much as he would have expected. Before, he would have brooded over every word, every expression, letting them fuel his bitterness. Now all he could think about was the twins waiting for him at dinner, the stories they'd share about their first day back at school, the drawings June would show him, the questions Lila would ask. The outside world could think what it wanted. What mattered was inside his home. What mattered was the new life beginning to take shape. Winter came, covering the mansion's gardens with a thin layer of snow. Inside, the heat from the radiators created a cozy contrast to the cold outside. Sawyer watched the girls through the library window as they pointed at the snowflakes drifting down from the sky. 3 months had passed since he began the adoption process. The paperwork was progressing, and Morgan, his lawyer, was optimistic. The girls now attended regular school, made friends, and brought home new stories and drawings. A routine had formed, surprisingly natural. On that Saturday afternoon, a light snowfall dusted the city. In the library, a fire crackled in the fireplace while the three of them played a board game, a new tradition Sawyer cherished more than he could express. It's your turn, June said, leaning over the colorful board. Sawyer rolled the dice and moved his piece along the winding path. You have to pick a card, Lila pointed out. He drew from the deck and read aloud, "Go back 3 spaces." June giggled. That bright sound that always brought light into Sawyer's days. Lila, always more analytical, was already assessing the new strategic position. "Now you're on the blue space," she noted. "Next turn you might take the shortcut." After a few more moves, June grew distracted, watching the snow fall outside the window. "We could build a snowman tomorrow," she suggested, "if it keeps snowing." "We could try," Sawyer replied cautiously. "I'm not very good at it." "We'll teach you," June assured him with the confidence only a child can have. "It's easy." An uneasy silence fell over them. They all knew, without saying it, that the wheelchair presented an obstacle to building a snowman. Since the girls had arrived, the wheelchair was rarely mentioned. They accepted it as part of Sawyer, without questions or discomfort. Lila was the one who broke the silence with a statement so simple, it held a power no psychologist or therapist had ever managed to wield over Sawyer. "I know how to make you walk again," she said suddenly, with the same casual tone one might use to comment on the weather. Sawyer looked at her, surprised not just by her words but by the absolute certainty in her voice. "Really?" he asked, trying to keep a light tone, though he felt his heart beat faster. "Yes," Lila said, as though explaining something obvious to an adult who just wasn't getting it. "You need physical therapy, like Mr. Rodriguez." "Who's Mr. Rodriguez?" "Our neighbor at school," June said, joining in. "He broke his leg playing soccer. He used crutches, then a cane, and now he's walking fine again. He does physical therapy 3 times a week," Lila added, her dark eyes serious and determined, "and exercises at home every day. That's how he got better so fast." Sawyer smiled, touched by the simplicity of that childlike logic. To them, it was all so straightforward. There was a problem. There was a solution. You just apply it. No room for guilt, self-punishment, or emotional complexities. In their world, if something's broken, you fix it. If it hurts, you heal it. If you can't walk, you do physical therapy until you can. "My case is a bit different," he explained gently. "My injury is to my spine. It's more complicated." "But the doctor said you could walk again, right?" Lila asked, her gaze penetrating, as though seeing through all his excuses. Sawyer was startled by the precision of her question. He had never discussed the medical details of his condition with the girls. "Yes," he admitted, feeling as though he was confessing a long-guarded secret. "The doctor said that with proper treatment, I could regain at least some mobility." "Then why don't you try?" June asked, with the kind of disarming innocence only a child can have. Her question hung in the air, too simple to answer with the complicated adult justifications Sawyer had built over a year. "It's complicated," he managed. Lila tilted her head, a gesture she made when processing new information. Her dark eyes examined Sawyer with an insight that seemed far beyond her years. "Is it because of your wife?" she asked. "Because she died and you didn't?" The question struck Sawyer like lightning, illuminating truths he had kept hidden from everyone, including himself. That was exactly it. The wheelchair wasn't just a physical aid. It was a penance, a self-imposed punishment, a way of atoning for surviving when Caroline did not. "Something like that," he murmured, barely audible. June moved closer, placing her small hand over his. "But now you have us. And we need you whole," Lila added, "so we can build snowmen." The simplicity of their words dismantled all his complex emotional barriers. He felt something warm slide down his cheek, a tear, then another, then another. He hadn't truly cried since Caroline's funeral, perhaps not even then. "It's your turn," June said gently, handing him the dice, giving him space to compose himself. They continued the game, but something had changed. A seed had been planted, not by expensive therapists or well-intentioned friends, but by 2 children who viewed the world with the clarity only innocence can provide. "I know how to make you walk again." Lila's words stayed with him for the rest of the day, through dinner while reading them a bedtime story, and later, alone in the library, staring at the dying fire in the fireplace. Their childlike straightforwardness had cut through layers of self-pity, guilt, and inertia. The girls didn't see a man serving penance. They saw Sawyer, their protector, someone who needed help to heal. There was no judgment in their eyes, only the unwavering certainty that problems existed to be solved. He thought of Caroline and how she had always encouraged him to face challenges. He remembered how she hated it when he gave up on something without trying. "You never know what you're capable of until you try," she would say. He thought of the girls and how they deserved a father who could run with them in the garden, teach them to ride bikes, build snowmen. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to think about himself, not as a guilty survivor, not as a grieving widower, but as a man who might still have a future that involved two little girls who saw not what he'd lost, but what he could still become. The next morning, after the girls left for school, Sawyer picked up the phone and made a call he'd been avoiding for over a year. "Wellington Rehabilitation Clinic," a female voice answered. "Good morning. My name is Sawyer Hale. I was a patient of Dr. Richards about a year ago." "One moment, Mr. Hale. I'll check your records." As he waited, Sawyer looked out the window. Snow had stopped during the night, leaving the garden covered in a pristine white blanket. A fresh start, a blank page. "Mr. Hale, Dr. Richards is available next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Would you like me to schedule you?" Sawyer took a deep breath. "Yes," he said, resolve in his voice. "I want to resume treatment." Not because he expected a miracle. Not because he believed he would be exactly as before, but because he wanted to try. Because two children, in their innocent wisdom, had shown him that sometimes the solution is far simpler than adults allow themselves to see. The following Tuesday, Sawyer entered the rehab clinic for the first time in over a year. Everything looked the same: the antiseptic smell, the bright walls, the physical therapy equipment. But he was different. "Mr. Hale," Dr. Richards greeted him, a middle-aged man with a serious but kind expression. "Good to see you again." "Doctor, I admit I didn't expect you to come back, not after so long. I changed my mind." The doctor studied him for a moment, noticing something different in his patient. "May I ask what brought about this change?" Sawyer hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I adopted two girls," he said. "Before I didn't have the strength to start this treatment, or the will, honestly. But now they push me. They give me a reason." The doctor nodded, understanding. "What do you hope to gain from this treatment?" "I'm not sure, but I want to try." "For them?" He paused. "And for me?" The doctor smiled slightly. "That's good enough for me. Let's start with a new evaluation and outline a treatment plan." His expression turned more serious. "I need you to understand, Mr. Hale. A lot of time has passed. The process will be harder now. There will be pain, frustration, times you'll want to quit. I'm ready. Your injury was never completely disabling. The paralysis had a strong psychosomatic component, worsened by the emotional trauma of the accident." Sawyer nodded. He'd heard it all before, but back then the words sounded hollow, like the doctors were offering false hope. He hadn't had the inner strength to face the grueling path to recovery. He lacked the motivation to endure the difficult road back. But now, those same words seemed like a real possibility, a path worth taking no matter how hard. The next few months were exactly as Dr. Richards had warned: difficult, painful, and frustrating. 3 times a week, Sawyer went to the clinic for sessions that left him exhausted and in pain he hadn't felt in a long time. On the other days, he did exercises at home with a private therapist. On the days when motivation faltered, when the pain felt too great, when progress seemed non-existent, it was the girls who kept him going. Their hopeful expressions, their childlike certainty he would succeed, their unwavering faith in his recovery, all of it fueled him when his own resolve failed. The first few weeks brought little visible progress. His muscles, atrophied from prolonged disuse, protested every movement. His body seemed to fight his will, refusing to obey even the simplest commands. The humiliation was perhaps the hardest part. Sawyer, who once took pride in his independence and strength, now needed help with basic exercises, falling in front of strangers, having to be lifted like a child, sweating profusely to accomplish movements that used to be automatic. All of it bruised his pride. But the girls, they turned every small step into a monumental victory. On the first day he came home from the clinic exhausted and discouraged, he found his room decorated with colorful drawings June had made. One said, "Strong Dad," showing a stick figure standing and smiling. Another showed 3 people holding hands, walking together. The next day, Lila showed up with a large chart she and Martha had made. "Progress board," it read at the top. Below were a series of goals, each with a line for small gold stars. "Every time you can do something new," Lila explained with the seriousness of a little scientist, "we'll put a star on it." For them, there were no failures or setbacks, just different paces of progress. Their childish logic turned each therapy session into an opportunity, not a reminder of his limitations. They didn't see a broken man trying to fix himself. They saw someone getting stronger day by day. The first star went up 2 weeks later, when Sawyer managed to stand for 10 full seconds supported by parallel bars. For an outside observer, it might have been a minor achievement, but for the girls it was cause for a celebration worthy of the Olympics. "First star," June shouted, jumping with excitement. Lila solemnly stood on a chair and carefully placed a gold star on the first line of the board. 10 seconds standing, she read aloud, as though announcing a historic feat. It took 3 weeks for him to double that time, but the second star went up with the same excitement. Then the third, when he took his first step with support, and the fourth, when he managed 3 steps in a row. On days when exhaustion outweighed determination, when pain made him doubt whether any of it was worth it, Sawyer looked at that star chart, at June's ever-growing collection of drawings, and into the girl's hopeful eyes. There, he found a strength he never had on his own. They pushed him past his limits, past what he thought possible. The girls never lost their enthusiasm. They never showed impatience. They never questioned whether it was all worthwhile. In their minds, the end result was certain. Sawyer would walk again. The only unknown was when. Sometimes they accompanied him to the clinic, sitting quietly in a corner. The therapists initially worried their presence would put pressure on Sawyer. Instead, they discovered he tried harder, endured more when they were around. "You can do it," June would shout when he attempted a particularly difficult exercise. "Take a deep breath first," Lila advised, echoing what she'd heard from the professionals. 4 months into the treatment, Sawyer managed to take his first steps without support. It was only 3 unsteady, shaky steps before his legs gave out, and he had to be caught by someone. But they were 3 steps that had seemed impossible a year before. "Her big star for today," June declared, and so it was. A gold star twice the size of the others went on the progress board. That night, after the girls went to bed, Sawyer looked at that board of stars, each one a small victory over the inertia that had ruled his life for too long. Each one shone as a reminder that a child's simple and direct view, "if it's broken, fix it," could be wiser than all the complicated adult rationalizations. His body was responding to treatment, slowly, painfully, but surely. His spirit was responding too. The bitterness that had consumed him for so long was beginning to fade, like melting snow under the spring sun. In its place grew something new: hope, possibility, a future. "I know how to make you walk again." Lila had been right, after all. Not just about physical therapy, but about something more fundamental. Seeing solutions where adults see only obstacles, having the courage to try when the fear of failure paralyzes, and the wisdom to view the world not just as it is, but as it could be. He wasn't doing this only for the girls, he realized. He was doing it for himself too. Because somehow the children's clear-eyed simplicity had penetrated all the guilt and self-punishment to reveal a forgotten truth, that maybe, just maybe, he deserved a second chance. His body was beginning to respond. So was his spirit. Spring arrived. The trees in the mansion's garden sprouted their first green buds, and a few early flowers were already appearing in the beds. The weather was milder now, though mornings were still cool with the last hints of winter. 2 more months had passed since Sawyer started physical therapy, 2 months of steady but slow progress, averaging 2 gold stars on the board per week. Small victories that the twins celebrated like monumental achievements. Sawyer had established a routine: Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at the clinic, home exercises on the other days. Martha reorganized one of the mansion's rooms into a mini rehab space, complete with parallel bars, light weights, and other equipment his therapists recommended. The girls always wanted to be involved. June would draw while Sawyer did his exercises. Lila would count reps out loud like a little coach. The adoption process was going well too. After many interviews and evaluations, Morgan said they were close to the judge's final decision. That Friday, Dr. Richards suggested a new challenge. "You're making great progress, Mr. Hale," he said, looking over the therapist's notes. "I think we can try something more advanced today." The new exercise required Sawyer to stand without support and do a full rotation, pivoting on his axis. It sounded simple, but demanded coordination and balance he was still rebuilding. "Let's try with just one therapist beside you," Dr. Richards suggested. "Ryan will be close by, but he won't be holding you this time." Sawyer agreed. The girls, who'd been allowed to watch the session that day, sat on a nearby bench, eyes filled with anticipation. June clutched a piece of paper and a pencil, ready to draw his triumph. Slowly, Sawyer released the parallel bars, feeling his legs bear his weight. Standing unassisted was no longer as daunting. He could do it for about a minute now. "Good, Ryan," the therapist encouraged. "Now rotate slowly to your right, one small step at a time." Sawyer inhaled deeply and began to turn. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. He was almost halfway around when it happened. A spasm in his right leg, followed by sudden weakness in his knees. He tried to recover his balance, but it was too late. He fell. It wasn't a soft tumble. His body hit the cushioned gym floor with enough force to hurt. Ryan tried to break the fall, but could only protect Sawyer's head from impact. "Sawyer!" June cried out, jumping from the bench. Lila remained seated, her eyes wide with shock. "I'm fine," Sawyer said automatically, but he wasn't. The physical pain was sharp, but worse was the feeling of defeat, of shame, of failure. It took 4 people to help him back into the wheelchair. His right leg throbbed with pain. No broken bones, the doctor assured him after a quick exam, but he'd have significant bruising. "These things happen in rehab, Doctor." Richards tried to reassure him. "Falls are part of the process. We can't let them discourage us." But Sawyer could barely hear him. He was looking at the girls, now standing beside his chair, faces filled with concern. He felt something he hadn't in a long time. Acute shame mixed with the sense that he had let someone down. The ride home was silent. The girls, usually chatty after sessions, stayed quiet in the back seat. Lila held the drawing June had made, not of the victory they'd hoped for, but of Sawyer being helped to his feet after the fall. At home, Martha was waiting with lunch ready. Sawyer barely touched his food. His mind replayed the fall over and over like a looped film clip. The sense of helplessness, of having his body betray him yet again, was crushing. "Sawyer's not hungry today," June told Martha when he excused himself before dessert. In his room, sitting on the bed, Sawyer picked up the phone and called the clinic. "I'd like to cancel my Monday session," he told the receptionist. "Are you sure, Mr. Hale, doctor?" Richards usually recommends keeping the routine, especially after... "I'm sure," he interrupted. "In fact, I'll need to pause the treatment. I'll call back when I'm ready to resume." After hanging up, he sat in silence for a long time. Then he stood, locked his bedroom door, and stayed there alone. He didn't want the girls to see him like this, defeated, weak, a failure. He spent the rest of the day shut away. Martha knocked once, asking if he needed anything. He politely refused, saying he just wanted to rest. The girls, surprisingly, didn't try to come in or call him for dinner. Perhaps Martha had told them to give him space. Or maybe, he thought bitterly, they were too disappointed to see him. Night fell. Lying in bed in the darkness, Sawyer felt the physical pain in his leg, but it was secondary compared to the pain in his spirit. All the progress of the past few weeks seemed like a cruel joke now. 1 step forward, 10 steps back. Why deceive himself? Why endure this humiliating process when the outcome was so uncertain? He was lost in these dark thoughts when he heard it. A faint rustling followed by a soft scraping sound. He sat up in bed and turned on the lamp. A piece of paper had been slipped under the door. A simple sheet, folded in half. Sawyer picked it up with slight apprehension. He opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing by June, Sawyer standing, holding hands with the two girls. Above, in careful handwriting he recognized as Lila's, were the words, "If you can't do it today, we'll try again together tomorrow." The simplicity of that message hit him like a wave. There was no blame in their words, no disappointment, just acceptance of the difficulty, and a promise of companionship, of support, of partnership. "If you can't do it today, we'll try again together tomorrow." A lump rose in Sawyer's throat. Tears that had refused to fall during the humiliating tumble now flowed freely. They weren't tears of self-pity or shame, but of relief, gratitude, and the realization that he didn't have to face this alone. He held the paper against his chest for a long moment. Then, taking a deep breath, he stood and walked to the door. His legs still hurt, his pride still wounded, but something in him had shifted. He unlocked the door and opened it slowly. In the hallway, leaning against the opposite wall, stood June and Lila, wearing pajamas, holding their toothbrushes, apparently on their way to bed. They froze when they saw him, uncertain. "You made this?" he asked, showing them the paper. They nodded in unison. "It was Lila's idea," June said. "I just did the drawing." Sawyer looked at the two little girls, so small, so seemingly fragile, yet with a strength that astounded him time and again. He saw no pity in their eyes, no disappointment, only anticipation, hope, faith. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. "And I'm sorry about today." "Why?" Lila asked, genuinely puzzled. "You just fell. Everybody falls." The simple truth nearly made him smile. It was true. Everybody falls. The difference lay in what happened afterward. "You two should get to bed," he said softly. "We've got a lot to do tomorrow." The girls smiled. They didn't ask what exactly they'd be doing, no need. All that mattered was there would be a tomorrow, and they'd be together. After they went to their room, Sawyer returned to his own. He picked up the phone again and dialed the clinic's number, reaching the answering machine this time. "This is Sawyer Hale. I'd like to confirm my session for Monday." He set the phone down and looked at June's drawing once more, before folding it carefully and placing it in the nightstand drawer. Tomorrow, they would try again. Together. May arrived, bringing warmer days, and the mansion's garden burst into color. The rose bushes Caroline had planted years before now bloomed in shades of red, pink, and white. The trees were covered in bright green leaves. Everything in nature seemed to celebrate renewal. There was renewal inside the house, too. Sawyer continued his physical therapy, newly motivated after that setback. The girl's note remained in his drawer, like a talisman he sometimes read on difficult days. Progress was steady, though still slow. He could now stand for longer periods and walk short distances with a cane. He usually did his home exercises in the presence of the twins, who invented games and contests to make the routines more fun. The gold starboard no longer fit on the wall. June began a new, larger one, with more ambitious goals. Walk through the entire garden, climb the stairs by yourself, dance at the birthday party. One particularly pleasant Saturday afternoon, Sawyer suggested they have lunch in the garden. Martha prepared sandwiches, juice, and fruit, placing everything in a large picnic basket. The girls ran ahead excitedly while Sawyer followed at a slower pace, supported by his cane. They picked a spot under a large tree that provided good shade. Martha spread out a checkered blanket on the grass and helped Sawyer sit. Getting up and down from the ground was still a challenge, but he insisted on trying, refusing to use the wheelchair he rarely needed indoors anymore. "I'll leave you to enjoy," Martha said after setting everything out. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me." Once they were alone, the girls dove into the sandwiches. They were growing fast and always seemed hungry. They looked healthier now, with fuller cheeks and brighter eyes. June had grown nearly an inch in 3 months. Lila, always the shorter twin, was starting to catch up. "Slow down," Sawyer teased, watching them eat enthusiastically. "No one's going to take your food away." They smiled, a bit embarrassed, but didn't really slow down. Some habits took time to change. "How was school yesterday?" Sawyer asked, taking a bite of his own sandwich. "My teacher said my drawing was the best in class," June said proudly. It was a picture of our family. My essay on dinosaurs got a gold star, Lila added, not wanting to be outdone. The teacher read it to everyone. Sawyer smiled. The girls were adjusting well at school. After a rough start with socialization, both were finding their place. June excelled in art, Lila in science and reading. They had made a few friends, though they still remained each other's closest companions. "Can we go for a walk afterwards?" June asked, pointing to the winding path through the garden. "You said you'd try walking to the fountain today." "I did say that," Sawyer replied. "We'll give it a try after lunch." The sun filtered through the tree leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow on the grass. A gentle breeze stirred the nearby flowers. It was one of those perfect moments Sawyer had forgotten how to appreciate during that dark year after the accident. Lila was the one who broke the peaceful silence with a question that had hovered unspoken for a while. "Was it the wheelchair that made you sad?" she asked, looking at him with that penetrating gaze that always seemed to see more than surface details. Sawyer stopped chewing, surprised. Though he'd briefly talked about the accident, he'd never gone into detail. The girls, Gran, with their remarkable sensitivity, had respected those invisible boundaries of his pain. "Not exactly," he finally answered. "It wasn't the wheelchair itself." Both girls listened intently, sandwiches forgotten in their hands. Sawyer realized it might be time to talk. They were now part of his life, forming a family. They deserved to know. And maybe he needed to say it aloud. "Do you want to know what happened? How I ended up like this?" They nodded in unison. Sawyer took a deep breath. Where to begin? How to explain the complexity of guilt, remorse, and self-punishment that had consumed him? "It happened over a year ago," he began, choosing his words carefully. "Caroline, my wife, and I were coming home from a party. It was late at night, and it was raining hard." The girls listened in silence, their unfinished sandwiches still in their hands. "We were arguing, nothing major. One of those silly arguments couples have sometimes, about work. I was working too much, not spending enough time with her. She was right, of course." He paused, recalling it vividly. The rain pounding the windshield, the wipers working overtime, Caroline's hurt voice telling him she felt alone, even when he was home. "I was driving," he went on. "I got distracted by the argument. I didn't see the curve coming. When I did, it was too late. I tried to steer, but the road was slick." He paused again. The images played like a movie in his head. The car skidding, the sensation of weightlessness as it flipped, the screech of metal twisting, the screams, then silence. "The car rolled," he said quietly. "Rolled several times before stopping. By the time the paramedics arrived, Caroline was already—" He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. The girls understood. "You got hurt," June said softly, not as a question but a statement. "Yes, I was trapped in the wreckage for hours. When they finally got me out, I couldn't feel my legs. I had spinal damage, but the doctors always said I could recover most movement with therapy and time." "But you didn't want treatment," Lila concluded, connecting the dots. "No, I didn't." Sawyer lowered his gaze to his hands. "I never forgave myself. I refused the therapy. I thought I deserved it." The words flowed more easily than expected. He'd never admitted it so openly before, not even to his therapist. Deserved punishment for what? Lila asked with childlike logic. For causing the accident? For being alive when she wasn't? Silence followed. The girls processed the information, each in her own way, June with her heart, Lila with her mind. "She wouldn't want to see you like this," June said at last with surprising conviction. "We forgive you." The simplicity of that statement shook Sawyer. How could they forgive him for something they hadn't witnessed, something that happened before they came into his life? Yet there was a profound truth in June's words. Caroline wouldn't have wanted this for him. She was never vengeful or cruel. She would have hated seeing him punish himself. "Thank you," he said, voice trembling. "That means a lot." The girls smiled, as though they'd solved a difficult puzzle. For them, maybe it was just that simple, offering forgiveness freely, unconditionally. They finished lunch in silence. Sawyer felt oddly light, as though a weight he'd carried for so long had been eased, maybe not removed entirely, but lessened enough for him to breathe more freely. "What about you two?" he asked after a moment. "We never really talked about how you ended up on the streets that night." The twins exchanged glances, that silent communication that always fascinated Sawyer. "It's not a happy story," Lila warned. "Few stories about kids on the streets are," Sawyer responded gently. June took a sip of juice, as though gathering courage. "Our mum's name was Elena," she began. "She was beautiful, had dark hair like ours. She got very sick," Lila continued. "Really sick. She couldn't afford a doctor." "Cancer," June explained. "She told us about it. She said she was going to heaven but would try to find someone to take care of us first." Sawyer felt a lump in his throat. Two children so young, confronting death in such a direct way. "She died in the hospital," Lila said. "We couldn't see her. A social worker came to get us. She said she'd find us a good family." "But she didn't?" Sawyer asked. "She did, June replied, "but it never worked out. We went through shelters, the streets, hunger," Lila said with a matter-of-factness that contrasted harshly with her tender years. "Some families tried to adopt, but they always wanted just one of us." "You didn't want to be separated," Sawyer surmised. "No," they answered together. "So we ran away," Lila went on. "From the last place. It was a shelter, but not a nice one. People yelled a lot. We stayed on the street for a while," June added. "Then you found us." There was no bitterness in their voices, no anger at a system that had failed them or the adults who hadn't protected them, just a quiet acceptance of facts. "Now we have a home," Lila concluded simply, "and we have you." June nodded emphatically as if that wrapped up the matter. And perhaps it did, Sawyer thought. The past was the past, irreversible, unchangeable. The girls seemed to grasp that instinctively. You accept it and you move on. He was only just learning how. He looked at them, so small yet so resilient. They had seen and lived things no child ever should. Yet here they were, eating sandwiches in a sunny garden, planning walks, talking about drawings and dinosaurs, finding joy in the present without letting the past define or limit them. He felt a surge of admiration and something else, a deep protective feeling he recognized as love. Not the romantic love he'd felt for Caroline, but something equally powerful, the kind of love that wants only the best for someone else, with no expectation of return. He realized he didn't need to know every detail of their past. He didn't need the full list of their traumas, difficulties, or desperate moments. All that mattered was being there for them now, physically and emotionally present. "Should we try walking to the fountain now?" June asked after finishing her juice. "You promised." "You did promise," Lila echoed. Sawyer smiled. "Yes, I promised. Let's try." The girls jumped up, gathering the remains of their meal in the basket. Sawyer used his cane to stand, exerting a bit of effort but nothing too daunting. He still had to focus, yet it was much easier than before. "Need help with the basket?" he asked. "We can carry it," Lila answered. "You need to focus on walking." "We'll go slowly," June promised, taking hold of his free hand. "No rush." Sawyer nodded, grateful for their understanding. Lila took his other hand, the one holding the cane, matching her pace to his slow, careful steps. Together, the three of them set off along the winding path leading to the fountain at the garden's center. Slowly, without hurry, one step at a time. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the garden, the shadows gently lengthened. The distant sound of water splashing in the fountain seemed to beckon them. Sawyer felt the small, confident hands of the girls in his, and thought that for the first time since the accident, he was truly moving forward, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. Not because he was fully healed, not because he had forgotten or completely overcome the past, but because he had found something worth moving toward, something that made him want to be present, truly present, for every step ahead. The adoption process was finally complete. After months of evaluations, interviews, and paperwork, the judge signed the official documents making June and Lila legally Sawyer's daughters. The celebration was small, just the four of them, including Martha, sharing a special chocolate cake for the occasion. The girls were beaming. For the first time since he'd met them, Sawyer saw something new in their eyes: security. Not just the security of a roof and regular meals, but the emotional security of belonging, of having a permanent place in the world, of knowing they wouldn't be separated or forced to leave. "Are we a real family now?" June asked, chocolate smudging the corners of her mouth. "We always were," Sawyer replied. "The paperwork just proves what we already knew." The next day, while the girls were at school, Sawyer decided it was time to rearrange a few things around the house. Martha had suggested converting one of the unused rooms into a dedicated study and play area for the twins. They were growing quickly and would soon need more space. Sawyer now walked around the house more easily. He still used a cane for longer distances, but he could move about unassisted indoors for the most part. Daily exercises and therapy sessions continued, and Dr. Richards was optimistic that he might abandon all walking aids by year's end. There was a smaller office near the library that looked perfect for the girls. It was nearly empty, except for a few shelves and an old desk. Sawyer decided to start clearing it out. The desk drawers were filled mostly with office supplies, paper clips, rubber bands, blank sheets. But the last drawer was stuck. Sawyer pulled harder until it finally opened, revealing a small compartment that looked untouched for a long time. Inside were some items he hadn't seen in over a year: a fountain pen Caroline had given him on their first wedding anniversary, a bundle of concert and theater tickets they had attended together, a few old photographs from when they were dating, and an envelope. It was a plain cream-colored envelope with no address or stamp, just his name in Caroline's slanted, elegant handwriting. Sawyer didn't remember ever seeing it before. He picked it up, his hands trembling slightly as he felt the letter paper inside. For a moment he hesitated. Was it a goodbye letter she'd written before their final trip? An emotional will he'd stashed away in his grief and forgotten. The thought of reading Caroline's parting words now, when he was finally finding balance in his new life, was unsettling. But something told him he needed to open it. The envelope looked old, and the date at the top of the letter, once he opened it, confirmed his hunch. It was written 6 months before the accident. It wasn't a farewell letter. It was more like a confession. Sawyer sat at the desk, feeling a heaviness in his chest as he began reading. "Dear Sawyer, I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to give you this letter. Probably not. You know how I hate confrontations, but I need to put these words on paper even if they stay hidden away in a drawer forever. We're becoming strangers in our own home. You leave before breakfast, come back after dinner. I feel almost invisible. Days go by and our conversations are about bills, appointments, future plans that never materialize. I'm not angry. I just feel small, like I occupy less and less space in your life. I understand your company is important, that you're building something significant, but sometimes I wonder if you notice what you're leaving behind while rushing toward the future. I wish we could appreciate the time we have. I wish we could have Sunday breakfasts together. Watch a movie without you checking your emails. Finally plan that trip to Italy we keep putting off. I wish you'd see me before you lose me, because I'm afraid that one day, when you finally have time, I might not be here anymore. Maybe not physically gone, but emotionally. And then it'll be too late for both of us. I still love you like I did on day one. But love needs presence, attention, small shared moments that add up to a life together. I hope I can find the courage to say all this in person, or maybe you'll notice before I need to. With love, Caroline." Sawyer let the letter slip onto the desk. He closed his eyes tight, feeling hot tears coursing down his cheeks. It was a dull ache, different from the guilt he'd carried about the accident. This was the pain of late realization, of truth that had been there all along, but he hadn't seen. She'd been alive, present, lonely, and he hadn't noticed. All those nights working late, all those weekends sacrificed for important meetings, the times he postponed vacations, birthdays, moments that would never come again. Caroline had tried to warn him, in her gentle, non-confrontational way, and he hadn't listened, too busy building a future he'd never share with her. The irony was cruel. After the accident, he punished himself for a momentary distraction behind the wheel. But the real failing happened far before that, far deeper. He had been distracted for years, missing the small moments that together made up the essence of their marriage, of a shared life. He remained there for a long time, the letter lying open on the desk, memories flooding his mind. Caroline waiting for him to come home for dinner, the food going cold as he called to say he'd be late once again. Her dozing on the sofa on a Friday night, trying to stay awake until he arrived. Her saddened look when he checked his phone for emails during an anniversary dinner that was supposed to be romantic. The sun began to set, casting orange shadows through the office window. Soon, Robert would bring the girls home from school. June would probably have a new drawing to show him. Lila would share some interesting fact she'd learned. They'd ask if they could play in the garden before dinner, making the most of the day's last sunlight. Those little moments, those small joys, the invisible fabric that life is made of. Sawyer folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. He wiped his tears and took a deep breath. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't recover lost moments with Caroline. He couldn't undo his choices or ease the loneliness she felt. But he could learn he could do things differently now. He glanced at the clock. He still had half an hour before the girls arrived. Enough time to call the office and cancel the video conference scheduled for that evening. Enough time to ask Martha to pop some popcorn and set up the living room for an impromptu movie night. Enough time to decide to be truly present. He picked up the phone and made the necessary calls. Then he stood, walked to the window, and watched the sunset paint the garden in gold and amber. The same sun Caroline had watched so many times alone, waiting for him. The same garden she had tended so lovingly. He heard the sound of Robert's car pulling up. In a moment, the girls would be running in, filling the house with their voices, stories, wants, and joys. Sawyer took a deep breath, feeling a renewed determination. He would not repeat the same mistakes. He would not let work or any other obligation overshadow what truly mattered. He would not miss out on the small moments that, together, create a full life. Caroline had been right. Love needed presence, attention, and those little moments shared. And he wanted to learn to really see, truly see, before it was too late again. The calendar in the kitchen marked exactly 5 months since Sawyer resumed physical therapy. 5 months of daily exercises, of small triumphs and occasional setbacks. 5 months of pain, sweat, and determination. The gold star chart the girls kept was completely filled, and a new one had already taken its place on the corridor wall. It was a typical Thursday. The girls had gone to school. Martha was in the kitchen preparing lunch, and Sawyer had just finished his morning workout. He felt unusually energized. In the past few weeks, he had made substantial progress. He could stand for long periods and walk short distances with minimal support. The therapist who visited 3 times a week was optimistic, saying Sawyer had surpassed initial expectations. After his shower, Sawyer sat on the bed to get dressed. The cane he used was propped against the nightstand. He looked at it thoughtfully. In yesterday's session, the therapist had suggested he try walking without support inside the house for short stretches, as long as someone was nearby. "Your muscle strength is good, and your balance has improved a lot," the therapist had said. "Now it's more a question of confidence." Sawyer studied the cane a moment longer, then did something he hadn't done in a year and a half. He stood up on his own, unsupported, and stayed standing. The sensation was both strange and familiar, like reconnecting with a longtime friend he hadn't seen in ages. His muscles trembled slightly, not out of weakness but nervous tension. He took a deep breath and took a step, then another and another. Slowly, he made his way from the bedroom to the adjacent bathroom, briefly steadying himself on the sink when he arrived. He looked at himself in the mirror, a mix of surprise and pride on his face. "Martha," he called, his voice echoing through the house. "Could you come here for a moment?" She appeared in the doorway within seconds, hands still damp from the kitchen sink, concern etched on her features. "Is something wrong, Mr. Hale?" "Yes," he replied, and to her surprise, he took 3 steps out of the bathroom with no support. "Something happened." Martha's face lit up. For a moment, it looked like she might clap or say something exuberant, but she held back, opting for a bright smile. "That's wonderful," she said softly. "The girls will be so happy." "Don't tell them yet," Sawyer requested. "I want to surprise them." For the rest of the morning, Sawyer practiced walking around his room and the adjacent corridor when he knew no one was watching. He alternated between using the cane and going short distances without it. Every step felt like a victory. Every yard gained a triumph over what had once seemed impossible. At 3 in the afternoon, Robert went to pick up the girls from school. Sawyer waited in the library, ostensibly working but actually planning how to reveal his progress. He heard the car arriving, then the animated voices of June and Lila entering, greeting Martha, asking about him. "He's in the library," Martha answered. "I think he has a surprise for you." The sound of small footsteps approached. Sawyer smiled, closing his laptop in the desk drawer. He sat in a normal chair, not the wheelchair he almost never used in the house anymore. "Dad!" June exclaimed, bursting in. "Martha said you have a surprise." Lila followed, more reserved, but equally curious. "What's the surprise?" Sawyer smiled at them. "I have an idea," he said. "How about you both set up a challenge for me?" The girls exchanged puzzled glances. "What kind of challenge?" Lila asked, ever cautious. "A challenge for me to cross the main hallway from one end to the other." June's eyes widened. "Walking without your cane." "Without the cane," Sawyer confirmed. "How does that sound?" "Can we make something special?" June asked, already buzzing with excitement. "Of course. You have an hour. I'll wait here." The girls dashed off, whispering to each other, planning. Sawyer heard them scurrying about the house, enlisting Martha's help, dragging things around in the corridor. Over the next hour, he stayed in the library, listening to the bustling activity outside. He caught snatches of laughter and minor debates over what should go where. Martha passed by once, carrying a stack of colored paper, a conspiratorial grin on her face. Finally, June appeared at the library door, wearing a paper hat shaped like a folded newspaper, a tiny general ready for command. "We're ready, Dad. Come on." Sawyer stood, taking hold of the cane only as a backup, and followed his daughter to the entrance of the hallway. The sight made him both smile and want to cry at the same time. The girls had created what they called a victory carpet, a long strip of colorful paper running the length of the main hallway, about 50 feet. It was decorated with drawings, encouraging messages, and cut-out footprints marking where he should step. They'd hung more pictures and signs on the walls. "You can do it. Super Dad." At the start of the corridor, Lila stood holding a crepe paper ribbon like a starting line. At the far end, Martha waited with a camera, ready to record the moment. "We prepared everything," June announced proudly. "It's your special path." Sawyer looked at the decorated hallway, a lump forming in his throat. All the effort, all the pain of the past few months, all the frustration, suddenly felt worth it. "I'm ready," he said, setting the cane aside against the wall. With the utmost seriousness, Lila raised the makeshift ribbon. "On your marks. Get set. Go." He broke through the symbolic ribbon, taking his first step onto a blue paper footprint. Then another. Green. Then another. Red. With each step, he felt his muscles working, his balance being tested, his body relearning movements once taken for granted. It wasn't perfect. There was a slight wobble to his gait, and his pace was slower than normal. But he was free. No aids, no crutches, no hands holding him up. Just him, his body, and his determination. June hopped alongside, cheering him on. "You've got this, Dad. You're doing it." Lila walked on the other side, her eyes shining with pride. "Just a few more steps," she encouraged. Step by step, Sawyer progressed along the hallway. He made it halfway with little trouble. At 3/4, he started feeling muscular fatigue and a hint of dizziness from the sustained effort, but he kept going, one foot in front of the other, one movement at a time. And then he was there at the end of the colorful corridor. He had walked the entire length without any support other than his own strength. "You did it!" the twins shouted in unison, running to hug him. Martha snapped photos, tears in her eyes, while the girls jumped around Sawyer, celebrating as if he'd just won an Olympic marathon. "You're really walking," June squealed, "without anything to hold you up." "It's like a miracle," Martha whispered, momentarily forgetting her usual professional composure. But Sawyer knew it wasn't a miracle. It was the culmination of months of hard work, determination, and refusing to give up. Even when the pain and discouragement felt overwhelming, it was the result of having something, someone, worth fighting for. After finally sitting on the living room sofa, exhausted but glowing, the girls snuggled up on either side of him. "I'm so proud," Lila said solemnly. "You worked really hard." "We all worked hard," Sawyer replied, hugging them. It was a team effort. Martha brought refreshments to celebrate, and they spent the rest of the afternoon in the living room, chatting, laughing, making plans for the upcoming weekend. For the first time in a very long while, their plans weren't fraught with concerns about accessibility or mobility limits, just normal family plans, looking forward to spending time together. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Sawyer remained in the darkened living room for a long time, reflecting on how much his life had changed. Just over 6 months ago, he'd been confined not just to a wheelchair, but to a prison of guilt and self-punishment he had built for himself. Now, he was literally taking his first steps into a new life. He thought about Caroline and how happy she would be to see him like this. He wondered if, in some way, she had guided these two little souls to him, knowing they all needed each other to heal wounds that once seemed incurable. The weekend arrived with a perfect sunny Saturday. Sawyer woke early, as if his body was eager to seize every moment of the day. From the kitchen came the sounds and smells of Martha making breakfast, pancakes, at the girl's special request to celebrate his achievement. He got up without a struggle, got dressed, and walked out into the hallway. He still felt a slight unsteadiness, but nothing that truly hindered him. The cane remained by the bedroom wall, forgotten. The house felt different now, no longer a mausoleum of memories. The walls, once adorned only with professionally chosen art, now featured June's colorful drawings. Where once every corner had been meticulously arranged, there were now toys, books, and little treasures belonging to the girls. Every room, every corridor, felt alive. In the kitchen, the twins were already at the table, still in their pajamas, hair messy from sleep. Martha was flipping pancakes, the sweet scent of maple syrup filling the air. "Morning, sleepyheads," Sawyer greeted, crossing to the fridge to grab juice. The girls looked at him in amazement, still not used to his newfound mobility. Sawyer poured juice into glasses, grabbed a paper towel when June spilled a bit, reached up to the tall cabinet for plates to help Martha, all with no apparent difficulty. "Who wants chocolate chip pancakes?" Martha asked, lifting the pan. "Me," the girls shouted together. Breakfast was noisy and cheerful. They made plans for the day. Maybe a stroll in the garden, a trip to the nearby park later in the afternoon. Things that once seemed too complicated were now easy to imagine. After breakfast, while Martha tidied up, Sawyer took the girls to the garden. The morning sun warmed the perfectly manicured lawn, and Caroline's rose bushes were in full bloom. The twins ran straight to the swing set installed beneath a large tree. "Push me, Dad!" June cried. Already on the swing, Sawyer obliged, marveling at how easily he could now perform such simple, yet significant, gestures. He pushed June's swing, then Lila's, smiling as they competed to see who could go higher. After a while, they settled on the grass for a break. The girls made flower crowns out of the daisies scattered beneath the trees, while Sawyer simply observed, enjoying the sun on his face, the gentle breeze, the perfection of the moment in all its simplicity. It was Lila who broke the reflective silence. "Now you walk like before," she said, watching him with that penetrating gaze of hers. Sawyer thought about it. Physically, he was almost there. The doctors said that with a few more months of therapy, even the keenest observer might not notice any lingering effects. "Yes," he replied thoughtfully, "but now I know where I'm going." Lila seemed satisfied by the deeper meaning in his response, nodding as if she understood perfectly. Having finished her daisy crown, June stood and placed it on Sawyer's head. "A king needs a crown," she declared solemnly, then burst into giggles at his amused expression. Sawyer adjusted the makeshift crown, playing along. June, in an impulsive burst of affection, jumped behind him to hug his neck. Lila, not to be left out, climbed onto Sawyer's outstretched legs in the grass. There was no audience for that moment, no grand speeches, no profound declarations, just laughter, the rustling of leaves overhead, the distant hum of bees among the flowers, the sounds of a house, of a family brimming with life. Sawyer closed his eyes briefly, taking it all in. The light weight of June on his back, the warm presence of Lila in his lap, the comforting sun on his face. He was walking, he was living, and for the first time since losing Caroline, he wasn't missing anything. The emptiness he'd carried so long had been filled, not in the way he'd expected, not along the path he'd planned, but in a way that now seemed perfectly right in its imperfection, like his step